The RGBLink ASKnano is a tiny wireless HDMI transmitter with a few extra tricks. It comes with two HDMI receivers, which can receive the video feed from the transmitter, or you can even AirPlay to them from your phone. So let's jump in and take a closer look. Hi, I'm Aaron Parecki. Before we get started, I need to mention that RGBLink sent this over to me to share with you on the channel, but this video isn't sponsored and they don't get to review this video before I post it. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. First, let's start with what's in the box. In the box, you get one transmitter and two receiver sticks. They have an HDMI port on one side and a USB-C port on the other. Also in the box are a handful of cables and adapters. They include these short HDMI extensions in case you want to plug into something where the stick won't fit directly. So to get going with this, you just plug each device in and you give them power. So for example, you can connect a computer to start wirelessly sharing your slides. There's no drivers to install since it's just connected to the HDMI port of the computer. And this means you can also connect it to other things like sharing the multi-view of an ATEM Mini wirelessly, or even using it as a wireless camera link. There are a handful of similar kinds of devices out there, some of which I've shared on this channel before, but there are a few things that make this one in particular stand out. In particular, the fact that it has two HDMI receivers that work with the one transmitter. These receivers will both receive a copy of whatever this transmitter is sending, or you can actually AirPlay to each of them independently from a smartphone or a computer. For this video, I'm going to go ahead and connect the receivers to the back of my ATEM Mini so we can see what they look like. If it doesn't connect automatically, then press the button on the transmitter when it's red, and that should pair it with the receiver. Once the light turns solid blue, that means it's paired to the receiver, and you should now see the image on the receiver. I've got the receiver plugged into HDMI 2 back here, and we can see that it's showing up in camera 2 on the ATEM. As far as my computer is concerned, this is just another external monitor. I can go to the display settings of my computer, and I can actually change between mirroring or extending the desktop. Right now it's set to mirror, but I could actually use this as an extended desktop, and now this appears as a second monitor, so I can go drag windows between this and my main monitor. So at this point, I can actually open up Keynote, click on Play Slideshow, and it's going to show my speaker notes on the computer screen, and then show the actual presentation over on the monitor over here. There are two ways you can share from a phone. You can either use an HDMI dongle for your phone, or you could share using AirPlay. The one problem with the HDMI dongle is that your phone likely won't provide enough power to the transmitter, so you will need to provide external power to the transmitter. For example, I can give the transmitter some power here, connect it to the HDMI dongle, and plug that into my phone. And once it all boots up and gets connected, my phone's screen will be mirrored wirelessly over to the ATEM. But let's undo all that because the better option is to AirPlay wirelessly from the phone directly to the receiver. In order to do that, we're gonna have to change the mode that the receiver is in. Right now it's in TX mode, which means it'll receive the signal from the transmitter. There's a button on the receiver to change modes. So if I go ahead and press the button in the back, it'll then switch into AirPlay Miracast mode. This works with both iOS and Android devices. So now it's showing us a Wi-Fi name and a password for the Wi-Fi. So if I go into my phone's Wi-Fi settings, I can see the ASKnano 4K hotspot is here. Now that I'm connected, I can go and AirPlay over to that screen. This is the only one showing up because that's the Wi-Fi I'm on. I'll go ahead and tap that, and within a couple seconds, we should see my phone's screen mirroring appear over here. Now it's just like before, except this time it's all wireless. So now that my phone's connected, I can open up a presentation in Keynote and play that. And again, we get the speaker notes on the phone and the main presentation over there. Since this does come with two receivers, you might be wondering how that works with AirPlay. Well, both receivers will actually broadcast a different Wi-Fi hotspot name. So you would just connect your phone to each receiver's hotspot and you can broadcast to one receiver at a time. So this works with screen mirroring, whatever from your phone. You can play back presentations from Keynote, but you could also use it as a wireless camera by using an app with clean HDMI out. Now, this isn't exactly what this is meant for, so the results are not going to be fantastic, but it does actually work and it might be good enough for some things. I'll go ahead and launch the Blackmagic Camera app, and now we can see that we've got a wireless link directly into the receiver here. The video quality is not as good as NDI, but again, it's a lot cheaper than most other solutions, and this is going to be sometimes good enough for some things. This, of course, also depends on your Wi-Fi hotspot, so you will need to make sure that your Wi-Fi is good enough to handle that kind of video. But as far as screen sharing goes, that's really what it's meant for, and it's totally fine for that, where an occasional frame drop doesn't really matter. Now, I do want to talk for a minute about some of the more advanced Wi-Fi settings. You might have noticed I mentioned earlier, if you want to AirPlay, you have to actually connect to each of the receivers' Wi-Fi separately. So it's kind of annoying to switch your phone's Wi-Fi between them or switch it between the hotspot and your building Wi-Fi. Also, if you can't use cell internet on your phone, like if you're using this with an iPad or a computer, then that device won't have an internet connection once it's connected to the hotspot either. But the good news is there's a fix for this. Once the device is in AirPlay Miracast mode, you'll actually see up in the corner here an IP address. So go ahead and connect your phone to the Wi-Fi of the device, but take a note of this IP address. So once your phone's connected to the hotspot, enter that IP address on your phone, and you should see a web interface appear. This is going to scan for hotspots nearby and let you actually connect to a nearby hotspot. Once you see this appear, click on the one you want, enter the password for your Wi-Fi, and click connect. Once it's connected, you'll see in the top right corner, it changes from the IP address of the device to showing the Wi-Fi name that it's connected to and the IP address on your network. So now that the device is connected to your Wi-Fi, you can change your phone back to your Wi-Fi as well. And now that your phone is back on your Wi-Fi, you get all the options of sharing to the other AirPlay devices on your network, including now the ASKnano. So I can now AirPlay to this over my Wi-Fi, which is going to again mirror it over to the ASKnano, which is getting it from the Wi-Fi instead of the direct connection. The performance here seems about the same between the direct connection and the connection through my house Wi-Fi. And the benefit now is that your phone is back on your main Wi-Fi for internet. Okay, so this is all great so far, but I also want to put this through some quality tests. We're going to test the latency and the image quality of the wireless link. So to test this, I'm going to use my stress test video clips played back from a hyperdeck. I've carefully crafted these stress test clips to be able to test a variety of things like looking for frame drops, seeing how much detail is lost in compression, and looking for color banding artifacts. You can actually buy these clips if you want to test out your own gear, so I'll leave the link to these down below. First, I want to measure the latency. So what I'm going to do is play back the stress test clip. This has a little frame counter at the bottom, so we can freeze frame this by taking a photo or pause the video to see how far apart they are from the two sources. But because I want to see only the latency added by the wireless link and ignore any latency that might have been added from other gear here, what I'm actually going to do is run one copy of the hyperdeck clip into the ATEM Mini Extreme here, directly with an HDMI cable between the rack and the ATEM Mini. Then I'm going to take a second copy of it from the rack, run it into the transmitter, and connect the receiver to input 2 here. Now we can see that inputs 1 and 2 are showing the same clip, and we can already see there's a slight delay. So what I can do is actually switch to my super source layout, which has the 2 clips side by side, and go full screen on that so we can see the difference clearly. If I take a photo of this, and now we can take a look at the photo on my phone and see the difference between the two. So on the left is the video being played back from the hyperdeck. That was at +2 frames when I took the photo. On the right is the clip being received wirelessly, and that one was somewhere between -1 and 0, mostly at 0 by the time I took the picture, which actually means there's only 2 frames of difference between these 2 photos, which is surprisingly good. So it looks like it's somewhere between 2 and 3 frames at 30 frames a second, which is about 100 milliseconds or less, which is actually not bad at all. That is actually right up there with some of the much more expensive wireless transmitter. Also, something notable is that as I'm looking at the frames here, I'm actually not seeing any skipped frames. I can see it scanning all the way across here without dropping any frames on the received copy. So that suggests to me that you're going to get a very smooth video being played back here because we're not getting dropped frames in the wireless link. So the latency is pretty good, but what about the compression? Now this device definitely does compress the video feed because the transmitters that do lossless video are 10 times the price and have huge bulky antennas. This thing is extremely small and it's got clearly a built-in antenna. So let's look at some of the details of these stress test clips to see how noticeable the compression actually is. Now I'm going to first look at the video being played back from the hyperdeck. Now keep in mind you're looking at this on YouTube, which adds its own compression, but I can kind of describe what we should be seeing. This is the ideal version of the clip where we've got crisp whites and blacks. We've got very fine detail in the little pixel grid here. We've got this noise track, which is actually 4 separate regions, and it looks like it's moving that direction. We've got color gradients here to look at, as well as here, and of course the frame counter. So now I'm going to switch over and look at the feed from the wireless link. This is the wirelessly transmitted version of the stress test clip. Now again, you're not going to be able to see exactly what's going on because I'm looking at this in person and you're looking at it through a camera and another layer of compression. But what I can say is that it's actually pretty good already. Now, do remember that I specifically designed these clips to be extremely difficult to compress. It's meant to exaggerate any artifacts that you might actually get from the compression. In real life, you're going to get better results than what we are seeing in this clip, because in real life, videos don't look like this. But there are a couple of things that stand out. There is a bit of banding in these color gradients, but mostly in the green. It actually isn't very noticeable in the reds, pinks, and blues. It's mostly only noticeable in the green. If we move over to these little circles, I actually can see that there's a slight bit of color separation happening. So in the red and green, it looks mostly fine, but when we get down to the yellow and magenta, you can see there's a little bit of color banding around the edges of the circles. But it's really only because of this really harsh yellow and black edge. Something that actually surprised me is the noise track and the 1x1 pixel grid are actually super sharp. What you're supposed to see with this noise track is 4 separate regions moving separately. And actually, surprisingly, that is what I see in the wireless link. This is normally one of the first things that gets super muddy in compression. Similarly, if we go down to the pixel grid, this is a grid of 1x1 pixels on the left. And again, normally this turns into complete mush when you're looking at a compressed version. But I'm still seeing very sharp lines and very clear pixels here. To give you an idea of what we actually normally see with compression, I'm gonna go ahead and actually insert these live into this video on YouTube. So what you're seeing now is those 2 parts of the stress test actually being compressed by YouTube. And you can see what I mean, they're not super clear. Compare that to what you see on the monitor super close up, and it's actually really sharp in the wireless link. And you can see each noise track moving separately still. And again, this whole time while I've been testing this, I still haven't seen any frame drops. I'm seeing all of the dots light up as the little ball goes across the screen. But I'm sure your next question, since this is in fact called the ASKnano 4K, is can this really do 4K? Well, most of the gear in my studio is actually 1080. My live streams are 1080, most of the videos I produce are 1080. So I don't actually have a lot of gear that has 4K even to test with. But I do have this camera and I do have this monitor. So we can actually see if we can get this camera to send a 4K signal to this monitor wirelessly and see what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and jump into the menu of my camera here, go to the HDMI output section and change this to force it into 4K mode. Now this will always send a 4K signal out of this camera's HDMI port. One reason I'm using this monitor, aside from the fact that it actually does support 4K, is that it also shows us the resolution of the video feed received. So if I plug in a short cable from my camera directly into this monitor, we should see that it is coming up as a 4K signal from the camera wired. So now I can change this and plug in the receiver, and we can see what the receiver is showing us. So I'll just go ahead and plug in the receiver directly here. And sure enough, the receiver is sending a 4K signal to this monitor. So when I connect the camera to the transmitter, let's see if we see any video. So I'll just go ahead and give this a quick plug, connect it to the transmitter. This 4K monitor is getting a wireless 4K signal from the camera, and it's doing a good job keeping it pretty smooth. This is the wireless 4K video feed coming from the transmitter to the receiver on this monitor on the table. Now, there is quite a bit of a delay, you can see from my hands moving here. So if you are using this for a video of somebody talking like this, you will need to adjust the audio to actually match up. Some video processors have a way to delay audio. Not all of them do that. So I would actually recommend not using it for videoing a person, but use it for things where this amount of delay doesn't matter, like sharing somebody's slides or just showing hands or other things where you can't see the lip sync. But as you can see, the quality of the 4K video feed is great. One other thing I noticed is that, remember how there are 2 receivers? Well, this receiver on the table is receiving the 4K signal into this monitor, but I still have the receiver plugged into the switcher that I was using to bring in the video into this recording. And since my ATEM is all 1080, that means the receiver is actually downscaling it to a 1080 feed for that. I'll go ahead and patch in the video feed from the wireless transmitter directly into the receiver that's doing this recording. This is the downscaled 1080 version of the wireless feed that was also sent to the monitor on the table. This means you can send 2 copies of your video feed. One can be received by a 4K receiver and the other can be received by something that only supports 1080, which actually opens up a lot of possibilities for how to use this. So with all that said, what kinds of things do I think this is actually best for? I think the best application of this device is actually screen sharing, where millisecond latency isn't needed. We only did get between 2 and 3 frames of latency, which is too much for doing live video where you need the lips to be synced, but it's certainly enough for screen sharing. Plus, again, in order to get the latency down wirelessly, you have to spend thousands of dollars. And I think it goes to show that screen sharing is the expected use for this because of all the different features they have that support that. Again, you can plug the transmitter into a computer directly and the computer will see it as a second monitor, either mirroring or extending the display. You can also AirPlay or Miracast from an iPhone or an Android device wirelessly over to the receiver. And because the kit comes with 2 receivers, one neat trick you can do with this: plug in the transmitter to a computer, plug in one receiver to your ATEM and a second receiver to a projector or TV in the room. And now you've got a really easy way to capture the slides of someone's presentation while also sharing it into the room so people can see it in person. You can find links to purchase this kit down below, and the affiliate links help support this channel, and it doesn't cost any extra to you. And again, thanks to RGBLink for sending these over for me to share with you on the channel. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.